Elvis Costello, welcome to Woodstock.
It's good to be here.
Tell me about your thoughts about when you were here playing with Levon Helm.
Oh, well, I'll do that with my hat in honor of it. You know, that's what they. What can you say?
Said. Enough said.
Well, that says it all. It was an extraordinary evening, made perhaps more special because I came up here at a group of friends, my wife included, and but best of all, Alan Toussaint was with me, and Alan hadn't seen Levon since the time of the preparations for Rock of Ages. I thought they'd been in contact in the interim, but it turned out they hadn't. So you can imagine how charged that was, you know, and it was really wonderful, and we were all in the back parlor, I guess you'd call it, getting ready to go on and do the numbers, and Amy was running through string band numbers with Levon, and I said, "Can I sit in?" You know, I said, "On which songs?" I said, "All of them." So I played along best I could because I just wanted to be involved. For the night just seemed so full of music, and we played Atlantic City, and I think it's a Stanley Brothers song. I forget which songs we played now. Maybe Man of Constant Sorrow, I think. And I was just keeping in the background just to be part of it and just to see it all happen. And great audiences, as you know, and then other people came and went playing and made the evening of music. And all the time Alan was backstage and doing what he had done when he first came up here to Woodstock. He told a story that I think the charts that he had written for the band, they went missing, I think, and he wrote them all while he was up here. So in sort of a repeat, in a way, of that, he sat backstage while we were all rehearsing and then performing, and he was scribbling away on manuscript paper, and then he presented the horn section with a completely unique chart for a song which we had recorded but hadn't yet been released, The River in Reverse, which was the title track of the record that we made. Mm-hmm. But he did a sort of distilled version of that chart with the essentials in it, and he put it in front of the horn section, and we just basically played it spontaneously. It was the first group performance of the song, I think. I believe that's right. I played the song solo at one of the Katrina benefits, but it hadn't been performed by a band until that point.
That sounded pretty
so the fact that he and Alan writing the charts backstage, it'll always kill me, you know, that he did that. And then we went on to play Don't You Tell Henry and Don't Want to Hang on My Rock and Roll Shoes and these tunes, and it was just so joyful to play with Levon, and I just, you know, whether he was behind the kit or in front of it singing with the mandolin, it was just a marvelous spirit. Something I'd dreamed of having the experience of doing since I'd just been a fan of his playing and singing, and to share that evening was wonderful, and particularly as the snowstorm was coming in pretty hard, and we thought we might be here for a while.
Good place to get stuck, though.
Yeah, we did pretty much get stuck, and my friend Joshua drove Alan off into the night, and he drove into the snowstorm. They tried to beat the snowstorm back to New York, and it had quite a wild ride, I understand, and we had pretty wild ride the next day. We were sort of trapped up a driveway and where we were staying, and we couldn't get down onto the highway. And my friend Bill drove us back to the city, and we saw all sorts of cars in ditches turned over, and lots of state troopers with the lights going, where people are trying to dig people out of the meridian, you know. And it was a pretty wild night, you know, wild morning. Yeah.
When did music from Big Pink first enter your world?
I think it was one of those records that got spoken about, you know, among people who sort of knew. You have to sort of go back a little bit, I think, for some people, because everything is so available now at a click, you know, that if you know where to look, you can find most things. Sure. You know, you can find a version of, you can find the version of not just the record, but all of the makings of that record, there. Of course, you still need to have some sort of editorial sort of sense, or somebody can guide you. When I was sort of finding records like Big Pink, I was living in Liverpool, where my family's from, and there would be the one record shop where you could find, there'd be lots of record shops, but, there was nobody really guiding you much. Then there'd be one record shop where there was a guy who was sort of like had an opinion and could point you in the way of records. You should have that. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming across the cover and, I think it might have been a second-hand copy, of the record. And, the cover in itself was fairly unusual. It wasn't a picture there was no picture of the group.
Right.
It was this
Just a Bob Dylan
strange
painting,
painting by Bob, and you didn't really. And then you put the music on, and it was unlike anything anybody had heard. I'd heard the band by then. I suppose I'd heard The Weight and Rag Mama Rag when they'd been on the radio. And I used to, like, the first time I heard Rag Mama Rag on the radio, I couldn't believe it. It was like not like any other music I'd ever heard. And in a strange sort of way, it sounded like it sort of always had existed. It was a weird combination of old and new, But when Big Pink was a lot deeper, when you got into the whole substance of the record with the combination of voices, and you couldn't really work out where one voice gave off and another took on, except you could really recognize Levon singing, because it was very different, But all the falsetto from Richard and Rick, was such a, and I guess Robbie was singing as well. I don't really know. I still to this point haven't read any of the books about the band. I like my own imagining of the music rather. Right. I don't want to know how it was made. I like the idea that it's still, every time I put it on, it presents itself to me differently, and that it's among the most enduring music, particularly the first two records. And I'll make a case for the quality of all of them. When I saw the film about Levon, and he sort of dismisses everything after the second album, I think that's colored by some of the, the relationship stuff and which I am aware of, but I haven't pondered. It's painful when you love somebody's music that something that's so powerful musically could have ended in conflict and disarray, and you just wish for resolution in a way, even though I've experienced my own version of that. It's not as dramatic, but you can't get along with everybody in life. It just isn't going to happen. But out of the moments when you're in accord, there's some incredibly powerful stuff. And then perhaps after that, even some magical moments where you see that chemistry, musical chemistry of the individual members, So I remember going to see Levon and Rick playing. I guess it was billed as the band, but I think it was just the two of them and a lot of other musicians in the Lone Star. I don't even know what year it was. But it was, it was apparent that it wasn't the high point, of their, and it sort of seemed wrong to me that the musicians of that caliber were playing at a place that small, but they seemed to be joyful about what they were doing, and that's a lesson as well, that, And then the next time I ran into them was, they were on the road with Ringo, and we were all in one hotel together, and they were having a wild old time. It was kind of.
I've seen some videos of that.
Yeah, they were like, they were ordering everything on room service, and like the entire menu, and having a spontaneous party. And I remember Levon saying, "Come and have some gumbo. We've had it flown in." I said, "Who the hell has soup flown in?" It was so. It seemed like the height of, in some ways, kind of madness and beautiful as well, because it wasn't like, we've got some good weed being flown in. No, we've got some soup being flown in. I loved it, and I loved the spirit of it, and because those reviews that were the staple of rock and roll music when it started. That's not something people didn't really appreciate. Now. I think sometimes it's safety first with acts gathered together on bills, because they're not going to fill the hall without being on a bill together. But obviously in the original days, when people just had one or two songs to their name, they used to group 6 or 7 acts, and they'd play 3 shows or 4 shows a day.
Yeah.
When you read about the early rock and roll things, and it was all about who was going to headline and all the shenanigans that went on. If you know anything about R&B reviews or rock and roll reviews, there's something to that. You know, there's something to. I mean, one of my first tours was a review show, and it was both a lot of mischief and a lot of one-upmanship. You know, you learn how to your craft a little bit from doing that. You know. I learned how to sing loud by being in a noisy bar and trying to keep people under control.
Yeah.
You know, that you would command the room. And a lot of the songs that I sing now that people will listen, I can sometimes sing the quieter songs. I even sing some songs I wrote when I was 17, 18, 20, because they were good songs, but there were no way anybody was going to allow me the attention. The people I admired who sang quietly like that, they already had an audience. Therefore, when I went to see them, I couldn't. You couldn't learn from watching an individual singer-songwriter how to cast the spell, because the spell was unique to that artist, whoever it was, whether it was John Prine or James Taylor. You know, I mean, it was like the quality of their songs and the intimacy of their performance. You couldn't just magic that up by being one man alone with the guitar. So, of course, you're attracted to groups with a bit of force, you know, whatever that force is, whether it's a MG's type of thing or Muddy Waters Band or the Motown players. You know, I couldn't even imagine what size group that was. I thought it sounded like an orchestra. When I went to visit Hitsville in the 80s, I couldn't believe it was smaller than this room. And all these incredible records that sounded symphonic to me, that they'd come out of that tiny space.
So speaking of force, take me to 1977. I saw, I had a Circus magazine when I saw an ad for your first album. And I didn't know, I mean, we had Jagger and Bowie and all those, you know, the dolls and all that stuff in the 70s. And along comes Elvis Costello and that image that was separate from pretty much everything that we were into at that time. What did that guy want at that point?
I think I just wanted to, you know, I'd been trying to get my songs recorded. I still think I'm primarily a songwriter rather than, you know, I never really went for the job of being rock and roll star. You know, I could understand, and when you watch Mick Jagger, even to this day, you get the idea that he is uniquely gifted as a front man, as a performer, as a ringmaster. Perhaps ahead of being a singer. You know, he's a good singer, but it's all those other talents that frame the voice that he has and the story that he got to tell. I primarily thought the song was the most important thing, so I really thought I was probably going to write songs for other people. That was really what I thought I was going to do. So when I sort of almost accidentally ended up being a recording artist, it just seemed idiotic to attempt to compete with the Robert Plants, you know, with these guys with manes of hair and a shirt open to the navel. I just wasn't equipped for that. And it wasn't in my nature, it wasn't in my personality. And so I think my managers were shrewd in exaggerating some of the otherness of the way I appeared. I mean, you know, I wore glasses anyway. They said, well, why don't you make them even more kind of less cool and wear these ones? And then I started to, then it became like a good, kind of like just like anybody would put on costume to perform as an actor. Then it just becomes you, and I never give any second thought to it. It suited me as much as anything ever did, other than a paper bag over your head, and a lot of the aggression that was read into what I did is coincidental. You know, I think it was just a lot of it was uncertainty about what, you know, which foot to put forward first. People read it. See this? I have this gap in my teeth, and makes everything I say sound like a threat, you know. And so it is. I mean, I get in trouble at Borders because I sound insolent all the time, and I'm not. It's because there's percussion in the way I speak, and I got in trouble at school for the same reason. I have argumentative. I can be argumentative, but I'm not by nature just always looking for trouble, you know. Far from it. I just want to get on with my job. So I don't think I really had any idea about past I get to make one record. It was out of my imagining that I would work with the group Clover, who were handed to me as the musicians for my first recordings. because I'd been working with just a group of friends who just happened to play instruments, none of them very well, including myself. And suddenly I had these really great musicians. And then once I'd made a record, those guys had their own careers to take care of. So we needed to form a group, and I was very fortunate to form a really incredible group. You know, when you think about it, there's always got to be a lot of luck about that. And Pete Thomas was presented as the drummer. We found Steve Naive and Bruce Thomas from auditions. To find players of that caliber, and also that, for a few years at least, great cohesion as a unit, and then go and have the circumstances where we could hone that into something kind of very irresistible, was incredibly good fortune. And you know, but we didn't grow up together, so we didn't have a bond of other experience. So when it stopped working, it very obviously stopped working after a certain point because of, I guess, youthful selfishness on the part of all of us. And then it was time to work with other people. And in a way, although, you know, people are still sentimental about that group and some people would measure everything you do against those first few records, it's a nonsense, really, because if we were to regroup today, we'd all be different people with our different experiences. The Imposters, the group I have now, contains Steve and Pete and Davey Farragher, and has actually lasted longer than the Attractions did in their original incarnation, which most people would agree was the best work that we did, at least certainly the first 5 records.
Which were in like 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, the first 6 albums were like 5 years.
It's time to do some other things, you know, and there's time in life to do, thankfully, a number of other things and have other experiences and play with lots of unbelievable musicians I never could have dreamed of being in the studio. I'm not sorry that you know, we disbanded originally, because we certainly wouldn't have made any better records going the way we were. And the next record that I made in '85 with T-Bone Burnett just opened up the possibility of a different approach to accompanying a song. I'd always played the acoustic guitar. I'd always written on it predominantly, and then we'd amplified the songs. I didn't sit around with a big electric guitar sound. You know, I was never much of a guitar player, still not much of a guitar player, but I got to work with, you know, Jim Keltner and James Burton and Ray Brown and Earl Palmer. I mean, when Levon came on my TV show Spectacle, and he, you know, unfortunately he wasn't able to sing on the show, and he wasn't supposed to speak either on the show under doctor's orders. So we had sort of ambushed him a little bit. We built this. I don't know whether you've ever seen the show, but the show was an interview show, and in which there were performances together. And in the main, there were single subjects. You know, I spoke with Tony Bennett, I spoke with Lou Reed, I spoke with Elton John, who was the executive producer, one of the executive producers. But we also did these multiple artist shows where we either gathered together around and did a guitar pull, or in the case of this one show, I reached agreement with Alan Toussaint, Richard Thompson, and Nick Lowe that we would essentially make a show about Levon without telling him. You know, it would really be our love letter to him, but I had the strong feeling he wouldn't agree to being on it if he knew that was going to happen. Yep. So I proposed to him that we were going to form a band around him, and for one night we were going to make this unique band with, you know, what a great band. You've got Richard Thompson on lead guitar, you've got Nick Lowe on bass, you've got, you know, sort of Alan Toussaint on piano and Levon on drums, and I would be the ringmaster and sing. Larry Campbell, of course, was there, you know, invaluably as a sort of, you know, as cohesive. Larry and I have played together, and of course he was so important to Levon's later work, you know. And in addition, I had the Imposters, you know, standing by. I had Pete and Davey, so that we could build the band piece by piece, and we called it building the band, but really it was a full-on love letter. You know? And all the songs we played were in some way associated with Levon. And of course, so when he came to the studio that day and told me, you know, I can't sing. I knew he couldn't. I knew he was resting his voice from singing at that time. But then he said he'd been forbidden to speak. We didn't really have a fourth act. You know? we didn't have the final part of the show. The payoff of the whole thing was sort of in the air. So I said, well, we can cover it. I said, will you go along with this gag? I said, like, you're so expressive in the way you play. I would have asked you about drummers, right? I would have asked you about, if we could have a conversation, of course I'd have to ask you about Spider Kilpatrick, Lightning Hopkins drummer, or any of the people that would have informed the way he played, and the people that I knew. So I said the names, and he responded. We just did it like a gag, and it was both sad in a way, but beautiful in another way, and we mentioned Earl Palmer and Zygmunt Lest and Jimmy Lee Keltner, as he called him, and it was beautiful, because we got to reference the people who were his contemporaries and people who were his influences. I remember going to the Delta Heritage Museum, I think it is, in Helena, Arkansas, and seeing the kit, which I'd only ever seen on the cover of a Sonny Boy record, and which Levon owned, which was Sonny Boy's drummer's kit, and seeing his name on the little thing saying courtesy of, and I thought, this is a man who knows where he's come from, that somebody would have preserved that with the hand-painted drum King Biscuit kind of, it was a beautiful thing to see it, because those records are a mystery, how they could even exist, and that's the town that Sonny Boy Williamson came from, and that's the first blues musician I ever saw growing up in England. He came on 6 o'clock in the evening in a bowler hat. I think he was coming on one of those tours where the blues artists came over, and you had a BBC guy with a very English accent going, and now the American blues singer Sonny Boy Williamson. And I don't remember what song he sang, 9 Below Zero or something. I don't remember the song, but I remember the impact of seeing a man you would just never, You got to understand that if you grew up in America in the 50s, your access, if you had the curiosity to tune your radio, that you could hear blues, hillbilly music, rock and roll. In England, we had much less access to the music. It was all filtered through. We only had one radio channel that played music, and they played very little recorded music. There were specialist programs if you knew when to listen, but if you were a kid, you didn't necessarily have the information that we have now. So it was also much a question of rarity and chance, that somebody would come on and you would be so shocked. And obviously that's why there's so much love among the musicians who are older than me, like from the era of the Rolling Stones and the Animals, and all of these musicians who revered the Chicago blues, and in most cases started out just trying to play that music, in most cases pretty badly when you listen to it, but it was done with such a lot of affection. And the fact is that it introduced younger people like me to the names of those people, that they even existed, because we had no other way to know that music was even around in the world. Just the same way now as if, we will hear music from a completely other culture and it'll be a revelation to us, because we might not understand the language, but you can hear the humanity and the shared stories in it. And that's why so many people become fascinated with music from other cultures, whether it's from Africa or from South America or from wherever. This music we have the shared humanity in it.
Did you see Bob Marley when he came to England in 1975?
No, Robbie did that.
Yeah?
Robbie did the lights.
Really?
You should interview Robbie about Bob Marley.
All right, we'll get to that in a second, too. So the new one is Wise Up Ghost with The Roots. Could you have written this album with any other band than The Roots?
I don't think so.
These songs?
No. Well, I mean, the great thing about the way we worked was that it was very unself-conscious. We didn't tell anybody, including ourselves, that we were making a record till it was made. I'd been on the show a number of times, and Questlove said, we want to do something that's, something a little bit more than just for one night performance. But we didn't know what that was, whether it was one track, an EP, some things we'd put on the internet. We didn't know how casually or seriously we would take it until we got underway. The initial idea was to revisit some of my songs, and I suppose the first key decision was the one I made, that we wouldn't simply rearrange the songs. We would actually, in some cases, dismantle them and reassemble them to tell new stories. and I would combine verses from different times that had shared themes between songs like Pills and Soap and National Ransom, a most recent song. They talked about some of the same, and I built a bridge between those verses with a verse from a song that was exactly in the middle chronologically. Most people hearing these songs, I'm saying most of the human race, had no idea when any of the songs came from, because I didn't particularly pick, I didn't sort of, I don't delude myself that very many of my songs are that well known. There's maybe about 6 of my titles that are relatively well known among certain proportion of music fans, but I've written nearly 600 songs. So I mean, there's a lot that people are not, the general audience out there at any one day could stumble on a song of mine and it might as well be new. If I'm playing it with conviction, and if I'm playing it in the company of a great group of musicians like the Roots in an entirely new way, there was an opportunity to retell some stories, and it just happened that the record developed as a sort of more of a bulletin about the life that we're all sharing, rather than something about the private heart of the singer. Mm-hmm. And that's hence that we ended up with Walkers Uptown. And, obviously out of the process, we quickly went from repurposing verses from other songs and even musical motifs and arranging them in new ways and placing them into different contexts, to writing in entirely new songs. One isn't superior to the other, they just complemented one another. And the next thing we knew, it was January of this year, and we had to admit we'd made a record. Then we thought, well, if we've made a record, maybe the public should hear it, and we'll see who is interested in releasing it. And Blue Note were the most urgent about that, and they made the best case, and they did a beautiful job in. Don Was sort of paid me the compliment, which I think is entirely unjustified, in wanting to echo the design of City Lights, graphic design for the Pocket Poet series, and specifically Howl. City Lights were kind enough to let us, use that design with acknowledgement, because it's all about people who know and people who don't know. If anybody buys a copy of Howl because they're curious about that dedication and hasn't read it before, then that's been worthwhile, hasn't it? Because that's been good for them, but it doesn't place my writing on the same shelf as Allen Ginsberg. I don't think that's true. So it's just a way of saying that the words have their own reason to exist, and they're obviously here. They're supported by all sorts of very inventive musical composition, playing, and sound design. Because Stephen Mandel, the third producer, Questlove, and myself have relatively big profile in terms of this project, but Stephen is in the middle, facilitating the communication between us. The dialogue was almost entirely musical. We didn't have any theoretical conversations about the record. Stephen and I, on the other hand, were constantly in contact, and he sees Questlove every day because they work together at the Fallon show. So Stephen deserves a lot of credit for bringing the cohesion to the various ideas, and also to the interesting processing and placement of the instruments in an arrangement. That is the compositional element of production today. It's different than it was before, where there's a band playing in the room and it's how much reverb you put on something. If you're talking about getting in and shaving off milliseconds of a beat or dropping a beat out, these are techniques that have been inherited both from hip hop and from dub. This record isn't either of those types of music, but it shares some of the methodology of both of those forms of music.
And the music matches the characters. I mean, Jesus, you got the suicide bombers, you got,
Well, we're living in that world.
Reagan and Thatcher and Bush and Cheney and Obama and all
well, one of the reasons for singing songs that in some cases the verses were written 20 years ago is the same, we're subscribing to the same lies, or we're being fooled with the same trick, or some of us are. And I'm not putting myself above anybody else in having a greater understanding or a solution. It's not a solution record. It's more like a reporting of it, and then we all have to take out of every song we hear that it has commentary. what our own response might be, and if it's music that's playing while you have those feelings, then that in itself is a reason to exist. We played one concert show at the Brooklyn Bowl in a great venue and had a ball. We played a number of my songs in rearrangements, Jerry Dammer's song Ghost Town and John Lennon's I Found Out. And that was our set. And for now, that's the only show we have played or are planning to play. But the door is open to the possibility of us playing more. And if that's the only one we play, it was a damn good show, you know.
And obviously,
I only played up here at the Ramble once,
yeah,
but it's a special night.
But this says number one.
Well, yeah, there could always
Which
be a number two.
kind
There
of
is
implies
a
something
number
else.
two in the sense that there's Wise Up Thought coming out, I think November 19, which is a remix record of a number of the pieces of music. Black Thought has the lead track in there because people commented on his absence from the scene, being as it's a Roots record. And he's working on his own projects. Plus, Roots have made records before in which he did, you know, because they were vocal records. I just think that we, you know, it's the size of the canvas. You don't want to be crowding each other. You know, there's a scope for him to take some of the music and do what he wanted to do with that piece. There are other remixes. Kareem Riggins is one of the main remixers on it, who, funnily enough, plays drums with my wife a lot of the time in a jazz ensemble. But in the band that she has now, which is I wouldn't really define as a jazz ensemble. It's just a musical ensemble with all sorts of music in it. So that, you know, the boundaries between the different musics and the reasons why things are in certain places are all the time open to renegotiation, you know. That's the way I feel it.
And have you gone from the Roots back to Burt Bacharach?
Yeah. Well, Bert and I are working on a couple of things together. We've written a whole group of new songs together, a proposed musical based on the Painted from Memory album, but obviously in order to make that flow on the stage, there needed to be some new songs to give more specific description to the feelings and the character, to the nature of the characters in the story. And that's obviously in relatively early stages, but we'll hope to see it on the stage within a little while. And he and I are also working on another big musical project together. So to write two things with him simultaneously is pretty thrilling. And it's a very interesting contrast both to the record with the Roots and also to playing the show that I'm going to do tonight. You know, I'm here in the neighborhood to play in Kingston, and I've been playing these shows solo. They're of a slightly different nature than the solo shows I've done before. I pick about 20 songs a night that I know I want to play, that are connected in my mind by a thread or a word. That word could be love, it could be deceit, it could be truth, it could be, you know, but they're not grand schemes and they're not advertised. So I don't know until I get to the theatre which one I'm going to play. But I start out with about 20 songs that I know I'm going to play, 20 individual songs from my catalogue. And then I have various devices as time goes on, feel more at home in a kind of vaudeville theatre where we can detour in you know, at will to what the individuals in the audience may be curious to hear, or I may just simply feel like playing in the moment. And it seems so far to have changed the atmosphere in the concerts that we've played so far. So I don't want to jinx it by saying, well, it's going to work every night, but it feels more concentrated than other solo concerts I've played. Playing solo is obviously naturally more intimate, and it leans more on the words than when you play with a band, where there's, you know, a lot of other musical interest. It's just me with a guitar. I try to vary it, the different types of instrument, different forms of playing. I switch to stage position, and it creates a different atmosphere when you sit down and you concentrate on a more delicate way of picking the guitar, or go to the keyboard for a couple of numbers. But I've really enjoyed the response from the audience has been really unusual in a good way, and so it's an inexhaustible combination of in the same way as Wise Up Ghost proved that by repositioning verses, you could create a new story. There's an accumulated narrative to playing songs in a certain sequence, and without actually scripting something and making it into the one-man show format, which is an amazing thing if people can pull it off. I prefer to do that spontaneously. It's a combination of structure and complete spontaneity.
And you love the theater. It's beautiful theater.
I've loved every single one of the theaters I've been in. We've specifically chosen predominantly old vaudeville houses that are being, that the people who are running them have a real investment in the architecture, the history, the different kinds of show that you can do. You can play a rock and roll show in some of these. You can play a one-man show or a two-man show or 5 women show, whatever it is. Yeah, but you can't do that in some of the soulless. You can't do that in some of the soulless concrete boxes that are out there. The big spectacle show is a different. That's a different animal than the thing I'm doing.
You just played for the iPhone press conference, the release of the 5S. Are you a telephone junkie? No.
I always have to have a couple of them about me because I have 7-year-old boys, nearly 7-year-old boys, and I want to know what's happening with them. And my wife and I are quite a lot of the time on the road independently. We get to play occasionally together. We're not always apart, obviously, but the lines of communication are really key. All of these devices are, they have their pros and cons. You used to be able to get away. Now you can get on a plane and they can find you. It's like there's something to switching everything off.
Right. Yeah. And it's something to learn the restrictions that you have to put on the kids with these devices too.
We haven't really hit that too much at their age, but no, I think that's true. That's true. I think that some of the, it's a rabbit hole down which you don't want them to disappear too early.
Right.
They're gonna. Yeah.
My son's 11. He likes the new Drake album with all that cussing on it, and I feel odd restricting him on language, listen, and music, because I never wanted anybody to do that to me.
Well, it hasn't come. They know a few words they shouldn't know, but that hasn't come up as an issue as yet at their age. Of course it will, yeah, and of course they'll like some music which horrifies both of us. At the moment, they're showing a decent amount of curiosity about things that we can all enjoy. We're by no means forcing it on them, just make all of the music available. I showed them how records work. I mean, vinyl records and shellac records work. I got hold of my boy and I said, make a noise. And then I shook him a little bit and I said, right, you hear what happens? I said, that's what's happening when the needle's in the groove. Just like that. So then he could understand the physics of it, They like, if I put Rip It Up on a 78 record, they'll jump all over the furniture. There's a reason why they're trying to ban that music.
And it never worked.
Yeah.
Elvis Costello, have a great show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Or a cape.
Like a cape.
A cape.
I don't know. He's like on his own thing. He's like capes, kimonos.
Is this the red carpet for the Golden Globes now? What are you wearing? Who are you wearing?
Yeah.
Mountain
There'll be
Jam
a
is very
review
stylish.